At 18, Mom closed the door on me, predicting I'd fail and crawl back. So I worked, cried, and refused to break. Now I have everything she said I couldn't. 18. It's supposed to be a milestone, isn't it? Freedom, legal adulthood, the world opening up. For me, it was the day the floor fell out from beneath my feet. There was no party, no celebratory dinner, not even a card. Instead, my mother, the woman who had raised me, albeit with a certain emotional distance I'd always felt but couldn't quite name, decided my 18th birthday marked my mandatory graduation from childhood dependency. Her present was the front door, closing firmly behind me. "It's time you learned how the real world works," she'd said, her voice devoid of malice but chillingly practical, as if discussing utility bills. "Time you learned to struggle like I did." She pressed a small wad of cash into my hand, 400 pounds, meticulously counted out, and that was it. No discussion, no transition plan, just out. 18 years old, standing on the familiar pavement outside the only home I'd ever known, suddenly feeling like an alien dropped onto a hostile planet. The small suitcase beside me, hastily packed with clothes and a few sentimental items she'd allowed, felt pitifully inadequate against the enormity of the situation. The initial shock was less a sharp pain and more a dull, creeping numbness. The sounds of the street, passing cars, distant sirens, neighbors chatting, seemed muffled, unreal. Where did people go when they had nowhere to go? My mind frantically scrolled through possibilities, each hitting a dead end. Grandparents? Deceased? Father? Never in the picture. Aunts? Uncles? Distant, both geographically and emotionally. My mother had successfully kept us fairly isolated over the years, a fact I hadn't truly appreciated until that moment. My world had shrunk to the size of that closed front door, 400 quid. It sounded like a lot when I occasionally got birthday money, but staring down the barrel of housing, food, transport, it felt like monopoly money. Useless against the real-world costs I suddenly had to calculate. Panic began to bubble beneath the numbness. I couldn't just stand there. My first instinct was survival, and survival meant leaning on the only support system I really had. My school friends. With trembling fingers, I called Sarah first. Her mom answered, thankfully. Explaining the situation felt humiliating, stumbling over the words, "Mom kicked me out," feeling like a charity case. But Sarah's mom, bless her, just told me to come straight over. Those first few weeks were a masterclass in humility and the kindness of others. I became a nomad, rotating between Sarah's sofa, then Chloe's spare room floor, then briefly back to Sarah's when Chloe's brother came home from university. Each stay was punctuated by my own intense anxiety about being a burden. I tried to make myself invisible. Up early, out of the house, even if just to the library to stay warm. Back late, washing up meticulously, offering my dwindling cash for food I barely ate. Their parents were kind, mostly pitying, I think, but the unspoken temporariness of the arrangement hung heavy in the air. You can't stay on someone's sofa forever. The constant need to be pleasant, grateful, and unobtrusive was emotionally draining on top of the underlying fear. Where would I go next week? What if they got tired of me? The immediate priority was income. Any income. Forget career aspirations. This was about not sleeping rough. I trawled online job boards, walked high streets handing out CVs I'd typed up at the library. Rejection after rejection, or worse, silence. Then, finally, a bite. A greasy little takeaway place needed a cleaner and pot washer, late nights, cash in hand, minimum wage. It wasn't pretty. The place perpetually smelled of stale frying oil, congealed curry sauce, and despair. The work was grim. Scrubbing pans coated in burnt-on grime, mopping floors sticky with spilled drinks, dealing with overflowing bins in the back alley that rats seemed to consider a fine dining establishment. My colleagues were mostly other desperate people, transient workers, students juggling 3 jobs. Conversation was minimal. We were all just trying to get through the shift. I'd finish around 1 or 2 a.m., exhausted, reeking of chip fat, catching the night bus back to whichever friend's house was hosting me that week, collapsing onto the sofa or floor, only to drag myself up again a few hours later. But it was money. Slow, hard-earned, greasy money. Saving felt impossible at first, but I became ruthlessly frugal. Cheap biscuits for breakfast, maybe discounted sandwiches near closing time from a supermarket for lunch, often skipping dinner or eating whatever scraps were left over at the takeaway. Every spare pound was squirreled away. My goal, a room, any room, just a space with a door that locked, where I didn't feel like an imposition. After maybe 2 months of relentless saving and searching, scanning notice boards, dodgy online ads, word of mouth, I found something. An acquaintance from school, Liam, someone I barely knew beyond nodding terms, mentioned his shared house had a tiny box room available. His usual housemate had dropped out of college and moved back home suddenly. Liam wasn't exactly offering charity. He knew I was working and just needed anyone to cover the rent share quickly. He knew of my situation, vaguely, but wasn't overly sympathetic, more pragmatic. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the single mattress left behind and my suitcase. The shared kitchen and bathroom were perpetually messy, testament to 3 young lads living away from home for the first time. But the rent was just about manageable on my takeaway salary. If I continued living like a monk, I took it. Moving in felt monumental, carrying my few belongings up the stairs, closing the door of that tiny room behind me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A base. A place to breathe even if the air smelled faintly of damp and Lynx Africa. I kept the takeaway job, the long hours, the greasy smell clinging to my clothes. No matter how often I washed them in the coin-op machine down the road, life was still hard, precarious, lonely, but I wasn't homeless. That felt like a huge victory. With a roof, however leaky, over my head, and a routine, however grim, my brain started to tentatively look beyond immediate survival. The part of me that had always loved learning, the part that got decent grades despite a lackluster home environment, began to stir again. University. The word felt both ludicrous and essential. Ludicrous because, look at me, scrubbing grease traps for a living, living in a cupboard. Essential because, what was the alternative? A lifetime of minimum wage drudgery? I started using the library computers again, not just for job hunting, but for researching courses, entry requirements, and crucially, student finance. Could someone like me with no family support actually get loans to cover fees and living costs? The websites were dense, confusing, but the possibility seemed real. A path, however steep and uncertain, seemed to materialize out of the fog. It was around this time, maybe 6 months after the eviction, that I made the ill-fated decision to try and re-establish contact with my mother. Guilt? Lingering hope? A misguided sense of duty? Probably a toxic cocktail of all 3. I called her. The conversation was stilted, awkward. She asked where I was living, a shared place, what I was doing, working. She didn't offer help, nor did I ask. Then, foolishly, heart-pounding, I mentioned I was thinking about applying to university the following year. Her reaction wasn't explosive, not initially. It was worse. It was dripping with a kind of weary, condescending pity that instantly made me feel small and stupid. "Oh, darling," she sighed, the endearment sounding utterly false. "University? Really? Don't be ridiculous. That's not for people like us. It's full of rich kids, you know. You'll never fit in. You don't have the background, the polish." I tried to counter, mentioning student loans, my good grades. She seamlessly shifted gears to guilt-tripping. "And how are you planning to pay for that? More debt? After everything I did, scraping by to raise you? You just want to throw money away on some fancy idea? You should be focusing on working, saving properly." Over the next few weeks, whenever the topic arose, usually prompted by me, clinging to some naive hope she might come around, her negativity intensified. "You'll drop out," she stated flatly during one call. "Mark my words, it's too hard. You haven't got the discipline. You'll last 6 months, maybe a year, then come crawling back looking for help." Each prediction felt like a curse, designed to lodge itself in my brain and fester into self-doubt. Eventually, if I even mentioned researching courses, she'd just go completely silent, or pointedly ask about my cleaning job as if deliberately ignoring my aspirations. The message was clear. My dreams were an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a delusion she refused to entertain. The final, decisive severing of that informational umbilical cord came after a small, unexpected triumph. I'd secretly applied for a local educational bursary, a long shot aimed at disadvantaged young people in the area. It required essays, proof of income, or lack thereof, references. My old English teacher kindly obliged. Months later, incredibly, I got a letter saying I'd been awarded a small grant. Only £500, but to me it felt like winning the lottery. It was external validation, proof that someone, somewhere, believed I was worth investing in, even just a little. Buoyed by this, I made the mistake of calling Mum, thinking this might finally elicit a positive response. I told her about the bursary, the essays, the competitive process. Her reaction? A dry scoff down the phone line. "Luck," she declared, instantly deflating my fragile bubble of pride. "Beginner's luck. They probably just felt sorry for your situation. Don't go thinking it means anything. 500 quid? That won't even cover your books for the first term. It won't make any difference in the long run." The casual cruelty of it, the deliberate crushing of a small joy, struck me silent. But the true nail in the coffin came indirectly. A week or so later, I had to call her about some practical matter. Forwarding mail, I think. We finished the brief, necessary exchange, and just before she hung up, I heard her voice, slightly muffled but unmistakable, talking to someone else who must have been in the room with her. "Still banging on about university," she was saying. her tone a blend of exasperation and contempt that twisted my stomach. Thinks she's better than everyone else now, doesn't she? Got that little hand out and thinks she's set. Absolutely no idea how the real world works. Proper head full of nonsense. Click. That was the sound of the connection finally breaking. Not the phone line, but the internal one. The one that still foolishly sought her approval. It wasn't just that she didn't support me. She actively disdained my aspirations. She saw ambition as arrogance. To compound it, a cousin I occasionally texted confirmed Mum had been spinning tales to the wider family. That I'd dramatically run off, was being irresponsible, making bad choices. No mention of the eviction, of course. Just me, the ungrateful, delusional daughter. Right, that was it. No more updates. No more sharing hopes or fears. No more seeking validation where none existed. She wanted to believe I was struggling and failing? Fine, let her. She didn't deserve access to my life, my successes, or my setbacks anymore. The information flow ceased. From then on, I operated in stealth mode regarding my personal life. I poured all my energy into the university application, filling out the UCAS forms, writing the personal statement, navigating the labyrinthine student finance website. I did it all alone, hunched over the sticky desk in my box room after exhausting shifts at the takeaway. It felt like climbing a mountain in the dark, but every form submitted, every box ticked, was a step upwards. Getting the acceptance letter felt unreal. A place at a decent university, studying a subject I was passionate about, funded by loans I would worry about later. I remember holding the letter, reading it again and again, the formal language swimming slightly before my eyes. It wasn't just an acceptance, it was an escape route. I gave notice at the takeaway, notice on my grim little room, packed my few belongings, slightly more than I'd arrived with, mostly charity shop clothes and textbooks, and bought a one-way coach ticket to a new city. The distance felt symbolic, essential. Starting university was like landing on a different planet. The campus felt huge, buzzing with people my age who seemed not necessarily rich, but comfortable, secure. They talked about gap years, parental contributions, summer holidays abroad. I felt like an imposter, constantly braced for someone to see through my carefully constructed normalcy. I moved into basic student halls, a tiny room again, but clean, functional, and filled with other nervous first years. I immediately found another part-time job, bar work this time, slightly more sociable than pot washing, but still tiring, still essential for covering food, books, life. Balancing lectures, seminars, reading lists, essays, and 20 hours of bar work a week was relentless. There were times I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open in lectures, but the intellectual stimulation, the feeling of learning, of expanding my mind after years of just surviving, it was intoxicating. It was worth the exhaustion. I was finally doing something for me. It was during my second year, amidst the controlled chaos of deadlines and bar shifts, that my path crossed with the person who is now my partner. We were both enrolled in a particularly dry but mandatory module on research methodologies. Neither of us knew anyone else in the seminar group, and we ended up paired for a small presentation. Their name was Alex. I'm keeping names vague here. We bonded initially over mutual bafflement at the course material. Our friendship grew organically from there. We discovered a shared love for just walking, getting out of the city, exploring local footpaths, packing cheap sandwiches and thermos flasks of tea. We'd spend hours rambling through muddy fields or exploring crumbling ruins, talking about everything and nothing, course stresses, annoying housemates, weird lecturers, hopes for the future. Mine still tentative, theirs seemingly ordinary. It wasn't an instant romance. For a good few months we were simply friends, enjoying easy company and shared nerdy interests. The shift when it happened felt natural, inevitable. What cemented my comfort, my complete lack of suspicion about their background, was how utterly, refreshingly normal they seemed in every aspect of their student life. They lived off campus in a shared house that was, if anything, slightly more chaotic than the student halls I'd moved into after first year. Posters held up with blue tack, a perpetual pile of washing up by the sink, mysterious stains on the carpet, standard student digs. When we did food shops, it was always Aldi or Lidl, comparing prices on tins of beans, joking about own brand versus branded biscuits. There was no casual splashing of cash. Their wardrobe consisted of the universal student uniform, faded jeans, slightly stretched jumpers, comfortable trainers, maybe one smart outfit for interviews dug out from the back of the wardrobe. Never anything designer or expensive looking. They stressed about deadlines, pulled all-nighters fueled by cheap energy drinks, celebrated handing in essays with 2-for-1 pizzas like the rest of us. They even worked a part-time job for a while, shelving books in the university library. Crucially, there was never, ever any boasting. No casual mentions of exotic holidays, expensive hobbies, or influential family connections. If anything, they seemed slightly uncomfortable discussing family backgrounds in general, often deflecting questions with vague answers. I assumed, if I thought about it at all, that they perhaps came from a modest background like me, or maybe their family relationship was complicated. The idea of significant wealth simply didn't fit the picture. They were just Alex, kind, funny, intelligent, grounded, endearingly scruffy around the edges, the person I was falling deeply in love with. The hidden dimension, the truth about their family circumstances, remained completely off my radar, buried beneath years of carefully curated, or perhaps just genuinely preferred, normalcy. University wasn't easy, balancing the demanding coursework with the constant need to earn money, but I thrived on the challenge, the structure, the intellectual stimulation, the feeling of finally investing in my own future. It was everything my life had lacked before. I graduated with a good degree, surprising even myself sometimes with what I'd managed to achieve given where I started. The sense of accomplishment was immense, hard-won, and entirely my own. But I wasn't done. The taste of learning, of understanding the world through my chosen field, something related to public health and social policy, had hooked me. I secured funding for postgraduate studies, first a master's, then eventually embarking on the long road of a PhD. Alex, my partner, was there through it all. Having also graduated, they were navigating the early stages of their own career path, something seemingly solid but unspectacular, perhaps in research or policy analysis, mirroring my own interests. Our relationship deepened. We moved out of student-style shared houses into our first proper flat together. Small, rented, furnished with second-hand finds, but it felt like a palace compared to my previous digs. We were building a life, slowly, steadily, based on shared values, mutual respect, and the quiet comfort of knowing we were a team. Years slipped by in a comfortable rhythm of work, study, navigating bills, cooking cheap meals together, weekend walks still a favorite pastime. Marriage felt like the natural next step, a formalization of the partnership we'd already built. It was the run-up to the wedding, the point where families and finances inevitably become entangled, however reluctantly, that the carefully maintained facade of normalcy around Alex's background began to crumble. We started talking, tentatively at first, about the wedding itself. Small, we both agreed, just close friends. But then came the awkward question of parental involvement, or lack thereof. My side was simple, non-existent. Alex's side suddenly became complicated. Vague references to parents wanting to contribute led to discussions about potential guest lists. Mum might want to invite a few cousins, Alex mentioned hesitantly, then listed names that sounded vaguely familiar, almost aristocratic. A quick, discreet Google search later confirmed my suspicion. These weren't just cousins. They were minor nobility, tied to established family names synonymous with old money. Around the same time, Alex's parents offered what seemed, on the surface, like an incredibly generous wedding gift. They wanted to pay off my remaining student loans. It was a staggering amount, far beyond anything I'd ever conceived of as a gift. While incredibly kind, the sheer scale of it felt disproportionate. It prompted a direct question from me. Alex, that's incredibly generous. How can your parents just... The question hung in the air. The final, undeniable confirmation came almost by accident. Alex suggested we visit their parents properly before the wedding, spend a weekend. I'd met them briefly before, pleasant but slightly reserved people, at their moderately large but not ostentatious house near London. This time, however, they suggested we meet at the family home further out in the countryside where Alex had grown up, pulling up the long, winding drive, past acres of parkland, towards a sprawling, centuries-old manor house that looked like something out of a historical drama. Well, it rendered denial impossible. This wasn't just comfortable, this was serious. Generational wealth. It even vaguely clicked that I might have seen the house or the family name mentioned in passing in the society pages of a magazine years ago, something I'd dismissed as irrelevant fantasy at the time. This convergence, the guest list, the loan offer, the ancestral home, forced the conversation we'd perhaps both subconsciously avoided. Later that evening, sitting awkwardly in a drawing room larger than my entire first shared flat, Alex initiated it, finally deciding it was time, pre-marriage, to lay all the cards on the table. My internal reaction was a confused jumble. Primarily, confusion reigned. How could I reconcile the Alex I knew, the one who happily ate budget beans on toast and stressed about library fines, with this descendant of landed gentry? It felt like discovering your partner had been living a double life, albeit a mundane one. Worry immediately followed. Would this change things between us? Would there be unspoken expectations? A power imbalance I hadn't perceived before? Anxiety about meeting the wider family, navigating social situations completely alien to my experience, prickled at me. Would I ever fit in? Would they look down on my background? And underneath it all, a strange, detached, analytical curiosity, trying to process the logistics, the sheer scale of it, almost clinically, as a defense against the emotional overwhelm. The conversation itself was surprisingly calm. Alex seemed more embarrassed than anything else. Why the secrecy? Why the down-to-earth student act? It wasn't really a secret, Alex explained hesitantly. More just not relevant? When we met, I just wanted to be liked for me, not for my family name or money I hadn't earned myself. They admitted a deep-seated fear of attracting people for the wrong reasons, something they'd apparently encountered before university. They also mentioned their parents, despite the wealth, had been surprisingly firm about them learning independence during university, providing tuition and a basic allowance, but insisting they live within those means, get part-time jobs, understand the value of money. And honestly, Alex just found the whole topic of wealth awkward, even slightly distasteful, and genuinely preferred a simpler life, assuming I wasn't particularly interested in the finer details of family finances anyway. There was no malice in the omission, just a combination of wanting authenticity, slight social awkwardness, and perhaps a naive assumption that it wouldn't ultimately matter. And in the end, it didn't. Not really, not to the core of us. It took time to adjust my perception, certainly. There were awkward moments, navigating family events that felt like stepping onto a film set. But Alex remained Alex. Grounded, kind, supportive, still happiest on a muddy walk with a flask of tea. The wealth was a background fact, not the defining feature of our relationship. We married quietly, as planned. We continued to live relatively modestly, albeit without the grinding financial anxiety that had defined my early adulthood. My focus remained firmly on my PhD, then on building my career. I completed the doctorate, a culmination of years of hard work fueled by caffeine and sheer stubbornness. Securing a permanent position in the public health department felt like reaching the summit. Meaningful work, using my research skills to contribute something positive. It was exactly what I'd hoped for back when university felt like an impossible dream. I was proud. Proud of the letters after my name. Proud of the career I was building. Proud that I had done it entirely on my own merit. Throughout these years, contact with my mother remained minimal, dictated by the boundaries I'd established long ago. I simply allowed her to maintain her incorrect assumptions. Occasional, brief phone calls, maybe a Christmas card. If she asked about work, I gave vague answers. Oh, busy with research, or working on health policy stuff. If she asked about Alex, whose existence she was aware of but knew no details about, I'd say, they're fine, work's good, and immediately change the subject or claim I had to go. I never sent photos of our home, never mentioned holidays, certainly never breathed a word about Alex's family or our comfortable financial reality. If she started criticizing my perceived liberal elite views, gleaned from my job title perhaps, I learned to shut it down quickly and neutrally. Okay, Mum, interesting perspective. Anyway, I've got to run. It wasn't worth the fight. It felt sad, sometimes, this cultivated distance, this curated ignorance, but it was necessary for my own peace of mind. She had made her choices about our relationship. I was simply living with mine. Then, a couple of years ago, the call came. Not from her, obviously. From a distant aunt I barely spoke to. Mum had passed away. Relatively sudden, a heart attack. My immediate reaction was a confusing maelstrom. A pang of something that might have been sadness, quickly overshadowed by a profound sense of relief, then guilt for feeling relieved. Anger at the wasted years. The bitterness she clung to. Regret. Not for how I lived my life, but for the mother-daughter relationship we never had. The one she seemed incapable of fostering. It was a messy, complex knot of feelings, none of them simple grief. I told Alex, who just held me quietly, offering silent support, understanding without needing lengthy explanations. I decided to attend the funeral. It felt like a duty, a final punctuation mark. I went alone. Standing at the back of the small crematorium chapel, listening to the generic platitudes delivered by a celebrant who clearly didn't know her, watching the handful of attendees, mostly her work colleagues, a few distant relatives, I felt strangely detached. This woman, who had shaped my earliest years and whose rejection had inadvertently forged my path, felt like a stranger. There was a finality, certainly, but less raw grief and more a quiet acknowledgement of an ending. The difficult dynamic, the constant low-level hum of disapproval and misunderstanding, was over. Driving home from the funeral, the full irony struck me. She had died believing I was struggling, burdened by debt, trapped in a useless academic field, probably living a bohemian, unstable life she disapproved of. She had no idea about the PhD, the fulfilling career, the secure and loving marriage, the comfortable home, the complete absence of the financial struggle she seemed to almost wish upon me. She died without ever knowing that the very path she tried to sabotage, university, had been my salvation. It had given me the tools, the opportunities, and ultimately, the encounter with Alex, that led to a life far more stable and fulfilling than she could have imagined, or perhaps would have wanted for me. There's no triumphant I showed her feeling, just a quiet, slightly melancholy sense of vindication. Her negativity didn't derail me. Her predictions didn't come true. Kicking me out did force me to learn about the real world, but not in the way she intended. It taught me resilience. It taught me to rely on myself. It taught me the value of education, not just for a career, but for opening doors and changing the trajectory of a life. Looking back now, I don't feel bitterness towards her. Mostly just a kind of sad acceptance. But overwhelmingly, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the friends who housed me, for the bursary committee who took a chance, for the tutors who inspired me, for Alex, whose love and partnership grounds me, and gratitude for myself, for the scared but determined 18-year-old who refused to give up, who somehow navigated the wreckage of her old life and built a new one, brick by painstaking brick. It's a good life, a life worth living. And I built it. That's all for this story. I'll be back with another one. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It motivates me to create more content like this.